started ringing in 1926, when the old band packed up owing to a schmozzle with the vicar. And fortunately, Harry Watts and Ben Watts stayed on from the old band, and Bill Stevens, and they taught us ringers in the new band that was enlisted from the choir members mostly, and from the church. And within a couple of years we got a band together.
This was at St Werburgh's, of course.
Should have had some Werburgh's, yes. And it was in 1929 that we got together a band sufficiently good to ring the field grounds of Douglas. That was the first field of the group.
And what about ringing in the city as it was then? I mean, you were ringing in St Werburgh's, which I suppose then was on the fringe of the city.
Yeah.
You went at that time to ring in the centre of the city?
Well, what happened was that Edgar Guy used to come down occasionally to St Werburgh's with one or two Bristol Ringers and give us a hand when this band began. Mostly youngsters about 18 to 20, you see. And Harry Watts also used to ring at St Philip's, and he one week invited me to go down there to St Philip's. And that was my first experience of ringing in the city.
Who was in charge at St Philip's then?
Jack Rowe was in charge then.
What were they ringing down there at that time?
Well, they were ringing excellent Stedman. I've never heard Stedman triples called like Jack used to call them. That's really marvellous. And the bomb major and grounds and triples.
Was Jack ringing surprise down at St Philip's at that time?
No. But they were ringing in London just before the war, I know that. The band of 38, 37, 38. They had a good band, they were ringing in London, I remember that quite well. And they put up and rang Cambridge Major.
Yeah. So your main contact was with St Philip's?
It was, yes, it was really.
Yes.
But of course I went all around the other cities, all the other city towers.
Yeah, like St Stephen's?
Not so much St Stephen's. I was a little bit nervous about my abilities there, but I always went to St James on a Monday evening. Yeah. Rang with Harry Way and Dick Channons and Harry Way's son Jack and Fred Way, Frank Jewell, and a number of other good ringers, and I quite enjoyed it down there. And that was then I began to go around and ring on the towers. I rang at Clifton,
Yes.
Andrews,
Which was lost during the war.
yeah.
Did you?
Yes, I went up there. So you mentioned Dick Clark in your...
Yes, I did.
Well, Dick Clark was boss to my father at Fry's. He worked at Fry's. And he used to send a message home occasionally to me through my dad. And I remember quite well, he said that Sid would never do anything unless he used St Werburgh's. He said he should get on to higher numbers of bells. But might have been good advice, I don't know. But I've been very happy at St Werburgh's, always really.
So you've
because
been
of the fellowship amongst the group of people within the church, you see.
Yeah. So you've been ringing there now for 67 years.
67 years.
Well, that's a record.
Yes, and then of course, in addition to that, do you want me to go on about other towers?
Yes, I'll come back to it in a moment. Perhaps
Right.
we could just introduce Albert a moment,
Yes.
because Albert Tyler, you're just 70. In fact, you've had your 70th birthday last week.
Yes, yes.
And you've been ringing in Bristol since?
Since October 1935.
And how old were you then? Oh, if we can work it out.
Yes, I can. 12.
12. Can you tell me how you came to ring at St Stephen's, or start ringing at St Stephen's then?
Well, when we arrived in Bristol, my mother, who was aware and knew one or two of the ringers at St Stephen's, she took me along there and to introduce me, first of all, to the tower captain, and that was also because my father had been ringing there quite often, or going back to the 1920s early 1920s, and in fact he did ring a couple of peals there, and his name appears on the peal board. Well, in fact it appears on a couple of them. So really it was the natural spot for me to take up ringing again when I came to Bristol. So my mother introduced me and left me to it, as it were. It took a long, steady progress, or what seemed to be an age to me, but I found that I was attending ringing on Sunday mornings, and I was sitting in the corner, sitting by the treble, between the treble and the tenor box. Well, that was when they were 10 and before the rearrangement had taken place, because the tenor and the ninth had quite sizable boxes at that time. But I used to sit there and be very quiet, enjoy myself, just looking at the ring and listening to it. And slowly but surely, through having a pull at the end of the ringing of the morning, I just made slow progress. And I think it was slow progress which stood me in good stead, because from 1935, October 1935, up to February 1937, which was what, no more than 18 months, you see, I'd gone from being able to plain hunt the treble on 6 bells to ringing my first peal of 7 sinks. And I would not have thought that my progress was in any way compatible with producing that result. But in fact, it came about. I did have it, and I thoroughly enjoyed the peal.
Yeah. Perhaps we can talk about some of the characters which you both knew when you started ringing in Bristol, first of all. I mean, Sid, you've already mentioned Dick Chammings, who I think you knew quite well, and Jack Brown in an earlier tape has mentioned him. How old do you reckon he was when you knew him?
Dick Chammings?
Yes.
Oh, he's probably 71, 72.
Yes, and he'd been ringing in Bristol for perhaps almost, not quite as long as you have now, but...
No, but yes, he'd been ringing in Bristol. I think he came from Newton, and probably 40, 50 years earlier, I think. He still used to go down there and stay with his daughter.
Yes.
And ring there in Newton.
And Albert, you don't remember Dick Chammings?
No, I don't. No.
So he passed away probably by the time you arrived on the scene? Yes. But did he ever tell you anything, Sid, about ringing in his early days in Bristol?
Well, no, not really anything of note. He was, of course, always a very keen ringer at St. James, and he was well accepted everywhere there. But there's either St. James or St. Philip, but he didn't tell me a lot about the earlier ringing in Bristol, not really.
One of the names that's come up quite a lot, I think, in the discussions we've been having is that of Bill Cave, who remains quite a well-known ringer, and you both must have known Bill Cave quite well. I mean, what are your thoughts on Bill Cave? What sort of person was he?
Well, he was a pretty difficult man to get on with, really, and yet he was a great conductor. I can remember when some cooperative bells were open, and he came out about that time to the ceremony of opening the bells. And I was surprised how he got the ringers together and put them right. Pretty bad ringing. And later in the day I noticed that he was so efficient in bringing order back to chaos. But I found in the relations in Bristol there was a divided loyalty.
Was there? What between who and who?
Well, it was Edgar Guys and the B.O.R.G. Fisher mostly. And and the rest of us. And there was a bit of a do with the winding up of the ORG,
Yeah.
because Bill Cave hadn't quite entered into the spirit of the thing. And certainly, well, the handbell stand was in his works at Gaming Cave, the printer in Victoria Street. And at that time I was chairman of the BORG. And I remember I was asked to go from the committee to pick up this stand because it was needed for the handbells which had already passed on to St. Thomas, Fred Eaker. And it was much difficult about that.
Yes.
And
At what stage was that?
well, that was when I was chairman, and that was 14th annual dinner. Yes, 1935.
Yes, it was it? Yeah. So he was a difficult older man then to get on with.
Yes.
Do you remember him, Albert? Do you remember Bill Cave?
Oh gosh, yes.
I mean, you saw him as a youngster, obviously, and he was one of the older, dare I say, respected ringers of Bristol at that time. I mean, what was your view of him?
Well, I agree. He was not an easy person to get on with, but I don't say that from personal experience, but from my knowledge of his discussing and talking with other ringers. As far as I was concerned, I found him extremely helpful. He gave me every opportunity, particularly the practice nights at St. Nicholas. And as I said earlier, he came across the ringing chamber and gave me £0.50 and said how well I had rung the treble to a course of grand cicadas. Well, that was my first attempt, and it must have been well, I was going to say particularly noteworthy, because I can't imagine that anyone else would have come across the room and offered me £0.50 at that stage.
Well, £0.50 is quite a lot of money then,
Well,
presumably.
exactly. I mean, I was delighted with it, needless to say.
You did tell me earlier, there was a ringer who told you when you made a mistake and lost a peal, who came across to you and said, I'd rather have lost £0.50 than lost that peal. Who was that? Was that Dick Clark?
That's right. That's
Perhaps
right.
you could tell us that story.
Well, in fact, I forget how long we had been ringing now in the peal, but Dick Clark was a regular ringer, and he rang the fifth every Sunday morning. It was virtually regarded as his bell. And he came from St Andrews, Clifton, and in fact I was delighted to hear you refer to that just now, because I've never come across anyone that had run there.
Did you ring there?
No, I've never run there, and I've never come across anyone other than Dick Clark that had run there.
Were they unringable at the outbreak of war, those bells?
Not to my knowledge.
They were ringable then?
Oh yes, I think so. Yes.
But you never rung there because you were ringing 4 or 5 years before the war broke out.
Oh yes, but I wasn't aware of any ringing there, either on Sundays or practice night. It was a tower which seemed to me to be just closed down off the record, you know.
Sid, you must have rung there.
Yes, I rang there. Oh, I used to go up there with Dick Clark. I told you he was connected to my father, and he had sent an invitation for me to go up there on a Monday evening we rang.
Yeah.
And there was a nice little tower, and all around they had no billboards, mostly typed, framed small notices of appeals. Dozens of appeals around, including Clifton Royal. And Cambridge, yes. And it was a lovely ring of bells. They were a maiden ring.
Yes.
And they went very well indeed. And I had quite a welcome up there. There were 1 or 2 members of that band that also went to Emmanuel. And I was made quite welcome, and I rang Stedman, the grounds job. That was in the early stage of ringing.
They were a nice field bell.
Oh yes, I enjoyed them. And what a wonderful addition on the top of the Clifton Hill.
Yeah.
Now as you look across, you can see Dundry on the peak
Yes,
opposite.
that's right.
And it went through my mind, they, Dundry, must see this lovely church standing right on top of Clifton Hill.
And,
Yeah.
and it was completely destroyed.
Completely destroyed, yeah, but they've left the boundaries there and green grass, well-kept grass, and inside those boundaries is a memorial.
I can't see where it is. I don't know that I've ever been at the site. I don't know.
The tower was in existence when I lived in Clifton in the early 50s, and the church was upon that green with the tower standing, but I think the whole lot's been removed now.
Except the boundaries. The boundaries are there.
Boundary's still there.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting
Most
church,
interesting experience to
result.
see, to go there.
And of course, at this point in time, that they went during the war, and the other church you mentioned, Emmanuel Clifton, declared redundant, what now, about 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Bells taken out, sent Lord knows where, and the tower now part of a block of flats.
They were broken up for scrap in the time, taken away.
Yes.
That was a tragedy for Bristol because they were a nice ring of bells.
They were nice ring of bells, yes. And I think all of us here, except possibly Nick, actually rung on those bells when they were there. Can we get back to the Bristol United Ringing Guild?
Yeah.
Because Jack Brown talked a lot about the BRUG, and you both would have gone to dinners for it. Now, it started, we reckon, in about 1921, and it was started entirely as a sort of dinner committee, really a big ringing festival weekend. Was that the sole purpose, as you
No,
saw
that
it?
wasn't the sole purpose of it.
No, tell us what you...
It was really, it was a gathering of most of the top ringers in Bristol, and they used to meet underneath the St Thomas ringing chamber. There was a room there, which was sort of our headquarters, and we used to have perhaps 3 or 4 meetings a year. And at that time I was captain of some workers, and Edgar guys used to come out occasionally, and he said they ought to send me, or somebody, as a representative from some workers, and I went in there and I was elected on the committee. And our activities were quite wide, because during the summer they ran tours of Gloucestershire and Somerset, and Edgar guys booked up lovely towers through lovely countryside, and it got quite renowned about the countryside. They used to come down from London and other parts of England to have this annual fortnight's ringing in Bristol.
Oh, it was a fortnight,
Oh, yes.
jolly.
Yes, 10 days to a fortnight, and then they had trips right out into the countryside, and he booked up all the best rings of bells in Gloucestershire and Somerset, and it got a big reputation. The dinner, of course, became the most important event then, but in addition to that, Edgar Guys started the Directory of Bell Ringers in Great Britain, was really a predecessor to Dove.
Yes.
And I think there was over 1,100 names, I think.
How many times was that book published, Sid?
Well, I only got the 4th edition. I think there's only about 6 editions, wasn't it?
Before the war, obviously.
Yeah, before the war. And but it was very.
Have you got any of
It
those
was-
in your
it
archives,
was-
Albert?
It was pretty
Yes,
good.
yeah.
It was a marvellous effort, but of course it involved a lot of work. Edgar Guys must have spent hours on
Yeah.
this.
Was Edgar Guys the secretary of it from its inception right up to the war?
Yeah.
And you know, it was such a big thing. I mean, Albert, you must remember the dinners. You saw it in its later life, of course. I mean,
Yes.
what was your view of it in the late 1930s as a teenager?
Well, I regarded it as being something really special, because to me that was meeting a whole lot of new faces, new ringers, and they all seemed to be very capable ringers. And then that was probably because I was still floundering around, in the learning stages. But later, now it would have been in 1940 actually. Now I distinctly remember that particular dinner and that particular weekend, because as Sid had explained, Edgar Guys organised these trips particularly around Somerset, and to visit some of the best towers. And in 1940, they did have a coach which was booked, and it left the cathedral, and I was asked to do the conducting of the tour on that particular day, and that took us right the way through, well, Somerset, almost down to Devon and back. And I remember Frank Smallwood, who was well, one of the visitors that I remembered particularly, because as I stood up in the front of the coach when we were going along, not thinking that I need have anything to say, because we were then on the way to, we were going on the way to Chewton Mendip at the time. And Frank Smallwood stood up and said, "Oh, come on, young Mr. Tyler. You must now tell us where we are going, and you must keep us informed of the towers that we see." And I remember that because I felt so incapable of doing it. But fortunately, I had someone sitting right where I was standing, and he said, "Don't worry, I'll tell you where you are." And he knew that I couldn't have known many of the towers. And so I got through the day, actually, by commenting during the course of the travelling and saying exactly where we were and where we were going, and I simply cannot remember all the comments I made, but in the end, when we got back to Bristol, I was given rounds of applause, you see, and commented very highly on what I had done and what I had said. But that was really cheating a little, because the information had been given to me. But that tends to confirm what's said, that Edgar Guys did organise these trips, and they were done to the last detail, because he had meals laid on for them, well, in fact, there was nothing left to chance. And incidentally, that was on the Sunday morning after the previous night's dinner. But I also remember that in that 1940 dinner, I had to give a speech. Now, I was only, a young chappie in short trousers. I don't even know whether Sid remembers it. But I had to stand up and I make a presentation to the Reverend Patterson from St. Thomas. And I had a little piece of paper with two short, well, relatively short sentences. And I had to try and memorise those short sentences, which I think I failed to do. But I remembered reading this from a distance and speaking to this man who seemed to be tall and massive in front of me, although may not have been. And I gave him this presentation. I can't remember what it was now. I got a feeling it was, it may have been a pipe and tobacco pouch, but I'm not sure of that. And anyway, that was done right at the very end of the dinner. And I remember when I'd finished and the applause started, I just wanted to get down and get back to my seat.
Yeah.
You see? Yeah. But that's my distinct memory of that 1940 dinner.
Yeah. Well, it was such a big thing up to 1940, and we can all understand why it all stopped because of the war. But I think, of course, people of my generation find it difficult to understand why the whole thing, which was such a big thing only 6 years earlier, was wound up in 1946 at just one meeting. And I mean, Jack Brown said, well, it was probably because nobody would take on what Edgar Guys had been doing, and Edgar wasn't prepared to go on with it then. But even then, I mean, the chain was given to the Ancient Society St Stephen's Ringers, and the whole thing was wound up. I mean, were either of you there at the meeting where it was wound up? What actually did happen?
It was held at St John's belfry on the wall. And I well remember the meeting. Jack Brown spoke a lot about it, and Bert Bennett, and Fred Leake was there, and a number of other, because that was the School of Ringing that was in the offing there, you see, and they followed it took place, and there seemed to be a general opinion that there was an agenda set for the meeting by Edgar Guys, and I think, as far as I remember, he was quite. He wasn't sorry that it was to be ended, really. I don't think he really wished to carry on. He'd probably done more.
It was his child, so to speak, and he didn't want anyone else.
I felt that somehow, because it went through so without much argument. They said the Bristol branch was there, could do the same work as this BORG could do, and so the thing was resolved in that manner.
And was it decided at that meeting that the chain, the master's chain, should be given to the Ancient Society?
No, all the belongings were to be passed to the headquarters of Gloucester and Bristol. That was my interpretation of it.
How did the chain come into the possession of the Ancient Society St Stephen's Ringers? You don't know?
No, I don't know that.
Do you know, Albert? I mean, how that came to be?
No, because I was under the impression that the division of the spoils, as it were, was made as a direct result of the meeting that Sid is referring to, that held at St John's. And I didn't attend that meeting, and I think what I gleaned about it was given to me by Frank Skidmore.
Yes.
And I think he
was there.
He was there.
And he was master of the association at that point, wasn't he? Nearabouts there.
Oh yes, that's right. Yes, yeah. That's right. He was. But I understood from him that that the various items were being given to various bodies, and that included the gift to the Ancient Society.
So the gift to the Ancient Society went via the Gloucester and Bristol. The Gloucester and Bristol, if they were to have it, they must someone there must have decided.
Yes, I'm sure it did.
Yeah.
Which always seemed to me to be a great shame. One appreciates it's still in Bristol and it's in a society which has an ongoing future, but at the same time it's not in the hands of ringers as perhaps it ought to have been.
Yes,
it is a quite valuable chain, I would think. And what about handbells and other property?
Well, did they? Could I just read you the last paragraph of a letter I wrote to a lady who wrote in about the directory?
Yeah.
She'd come across a copy of it.
Yeah.
And wanted to know if it was still running, and could she have some material she'd written to the Ring of the World.
Yeah.
The Ring of the World passed it on to the G&B. G&B passed it on to Wilf Harris, and he passed it on to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't read it all out, but I wrote a reply to her, and this is with regard to what you've just mentioned. I said the BRG was a casualty of the war. I remember meeting held at St John's on the war in 47-8, when it was decided to wind up the guild and to pass all the possessions to the G&B. These included a fine set of handbells and a chain of office with silver medallions engraved with the chairman's name and year of office. The meeting decided that the Bristol branch of the G&B could carry out similar activities. The spirit and fellowship of the BORG did not live on, and looking back, I regret that the BORG did not survive. And I mentioned at the end, I was not sure of the position with regard to the copyright of the directory, which I think that was what the inquiry was about. Somebody was thinking about starting another directory.
I see.
Sawbridge.
Yeah.
Somebody at Sawbridge.
What was the date of that?
The date of that card was, well, the date of my letter was 12th of May 88, and the card acknowledging it was in June.
Yeah, yes. That was, well, not that long ago now.
No,
Of course,
yes.
fairly recently that people were actually looking at that.
Yeah, they'd come across a copy of this property in one
Yes.
part of it.
You've got several menus there, of course.
Yeah,
of
yes.
of the dinner. And
Yes.
the sort of things that were happening there.
Yes, including the one, which I was chairman, and the other one I got is of Percy Williams. His name hasn't been mentioned, but he was a member of St Philip's.
Yes.
And he's also treasurer of the Gloucester and Bristol
Mm-hmm.
at one time, wasn't he? When Charlie Gordon was.
Yes.
I've forgotten Percy Williams.
Percy
actually.
Williams, yes.
Yes, I had. I'd forgotten
Right, so,
him.
yes.
Yes. Is he on the photograph on the menu?
Is that
Yes,
you
on
on?
this
Is that
one.
you on that menu that I
Yes.
can see? If you just sort of point it in the direction of the camera, so I'd probably be able to pan in on it and get it into focus. Too is some of the characters that you knew between. I was going to say, you know, who were the most helpful? We talked about Bill Cave, and you know, he was sort of rather distant and difficult figure, even
Yeah,
though he was
yeah.
helpful to Albert in some ways. I mean, who were the people who were the helpful people? That's what I'd like to go on to. So let's go on from there. What about the people in Bristol? You know, between the wars. I mean, who were the people who were leaders and trying to push the standard ringing on, encourage young ringers, as you both were, Dan?
Yes. Well, I got a fairly good reception from everybody. Principally, the initial learning that in my early days at St Philip's under Jack Brown, but when St Ambrose opened up, I was a frequent visitor there. And Franz Gorham Skidmore was so helpful. They built a band, and there was a nice ring of bells, and we got just a good Stegman ring in there, and he was most helpful. But I remember others like Jack Burford, a very friendly man,
Yes.
kindly man, and Bill Knight. Bill Knight was from Cambridge, wasn't he? But he rang St Stephen's. He was
Yes.
most helpful.
Yeah.
And Fred Leaker was always very cooperative, and Alf Reeves. Of course, Alf Reeves was the appeal secretary of the GMP, and I was at that time I was treasurer of the GMP, and he used to make out his accounts for the year, and all was done beautifully neat, writing, and a record of all the pills run and the fees collected. He used to come round to my office, which was at Hodder's, the chemists, in 5 Nelson Street, Bristol. And he'd come up and see my office and deal with the fees. Fred Leaker used to look up occasionally because I was right in the heart of the city.
Yeah.
I always
Yes.
managed to pass in the field bottoms for the cost.
Jack Burford mentioned, I think Cecil mentioned
Yeah.
Jack Burford in his tape, because I think he used to walk in. Cecil used to say that Jack Burford lived in Knoll,
Yes.
and Cecil used to walk in from Knoll
Yeah.
with Jack Burford. So he obviously helped a lot of the younger people. You remember Jack Burford as well?
Oh, gosh, yes. He was the first person I met in the
Yes, you mentioned him.
Yes. He really was responsible for my upbringing in ringing. Although I did go to St Philip's at times, and I did go to St Nicholas. I did get quite a lot of help from Bill Cave, and also I got a lot of help when I progressed a little from Joe Dyke, because that's where or how I began to get on a little later on into joining his peel band. I say joining his peel band, not as a regular permanent member, but he was prepared to offer me, opportunities to go to various towers in North Somerset, and that coupled with the ringing at Redcliffe, because there was monthly ringing at Redcliffe, and when I got to a certain point of ringing Stedman and Caters, I was then invited to go to join the ringers at Redcliffe for their monthly practice, and that's really how I came to get into, well, the practice of Stedman 6.
Yeah, I mean, can we talk about Redcliffe for a moment? Because I got from Jack Brown and from Cecil that there was no band at Redcliffe. The idea that all the ringing at Redcliffe was paid ringing. It seemed to be somewhat separate from the rest. I mean, what was happening at Redcliffe? There was no Redcliffe Guild then, because Fred Hancock formed that after the war, I believe.
No, it always amazed me that the finest ringer bells in Bristol never had a band. As a youngster, as a young ringer, I thought, how remarkable. And the only names that ever appeared in the annual report was Harry Pring, and one other, I don't know who the other was. Yeah. And I could never understand it. In fact, I never had a chance to ring directly because the ring was so infrequent. That one 6-o'clock tower, never much chance to go in. It was only when the ringing, you mentioned the name of the Fred Hancock.
Fred Hancock. Yeah.
That when he started his band, and Don Clift was then a terrific help to me. Just after. Can I go on here?
Yes. Yes.
As I came back from the army, I was in Egypt for 5 years, 41 to 45, and I came back in July, that's right, and I'd hardly got home before Don Cliff was knocking at my door. Could I come along to Stapledown that following Sunday and bring a quarter of Cambridge Minor? I'd been abroad for 5 years. And Wilf Williams was living then with Don in the Chine at Stapledown. So on the Sunday morning I went along there, and although I hadn't rang any Cambridge for 5 years, we got through it. Got through the quarter.
Yeah. But the ringing at Redcliffe was paid then. Was it paid, as they said?
Well, there were two scales of ringing at Redcliffe. One was the paid ringing, which was referred to by Jack Brown. Now, I was involved in some of that myself, because we used to go up there at 6 in the morning on certain occasions, about 3 or 4 a year, and we were paid for that. And there were certain other ringing that we were paid for, mostly on weddings, but I didn't really ring for many of the occasions during the day. But apart from that, which I would refer to as the paid ringing band, there was a monthly practice held at Redcliffe, and as far as I remember, Jack Brown did not attend. He was not in attendance at all. Now, Bill Cave used to be there, and quite honestly, I don't really remember the rest of the band, except for the fact that Joe Dyke turned up on some occasions, and also a number of the St Stephen's band turned up. But with the exception of Jack Burford, I don't think he ever attended. But none of that, of course, was paid ringing. It was normal practice ringing. And again, contrary to what Jack Brown said, I remember them ringing Cambridge Maximus at many of those practices.
Yes, I mean, that's interesting, because Jack gave the impression in his tape that between the wars, people, the ringers that he knew, wanted to ring Grandsire sinks, Stedman sinks, and that's all. Yes. Although he did say that Bill Cave came to him and asked him to go to Redcliffe and said, you can't ring Cambridge Maximus here. And he said, well, can't ring it up there either, can I?
That's
As
right.
if it wasn't rung there. Now, that's not your memory of the situation.
Well, no, but then I think that Jack was referring to a period before my time.
I see, yeah.
And he must have had his disagreement with him long before I came on the scene. Because in any case, I remember there being Cambridge Maximus rung there because I simply couldn't ring it. And I had to sit down and watch and listen.
Yes.
So yes, Cambridge Maximus was rung.
Yeah. What were your memories of the ringing in Bristol at that time, in your earlier days, Sid? I mean, in the city, was it all Grandsire and Stedman in the early 30s, or was there anything?
Well, only sometimes were they ringing for prize.
Yeah.
Elsewhere, mostly Stedman and Grandsire and occasionally Cambridge, not always. Don Cliff gathered the band together after the war, really. He was one of the men, he and Fred Hancock. And I got one to names in line.
Yes.
Andrew Corrigan came along.
Oh yes, now he was famous for his collection of letters, wasn't he?
I got a copy of that collection,
Okay.
by the way.
Yeah.
He was a printer of great ability.
Right.
He's a man of great ability, really. And I can remember who was the famous Irish composer?
Gabriel Lindorf.
Gabriel Lindorf. Well, I worked in Nelson Street, and it was Thursday. It was a week after we'd rung it, Redcliffe, and I met him, and he said, Gabriel Lindorf's coming into Bristol. He said, I'll introduce you to him. So I was working at the time. He came along to Hodders, came down the yard, called me out, and introduced me to Gabriel Lindorf. Of course, I knew that he was a famous Stedman conductor.
Yes.
And a nice fellow to meet. Andrew Corrigan was a fairly good ringer. Occasionally, like always when they must do it, I suppose. But he had a very short temper.
Oh, that's nice. Yes.
Very short temper.
Yeah. Was he a Bristol ringer? Andrew Corrigan, would you say he was a ringer?
No,
in Bristol?
he was living in Bitton,
I see.
and he was registered in the G&B as a Bitton.
How old was Andrew Corrigan when you knew him?
I'll just say he was probably in his 60s when I knew him.
And he got together this collection of Right Place Surprises.
Oh yes,
Yes.
yes.
And
And he
printed
gave
it.
me a copy, by the way, which I've got here, by the way, if you
Yeah,
want to look
yes,
at
I
it.
will.
It was printed in bits, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
It was more than...
on the new print, on the newer principle of what do they call it? Not the blue line, the opposite of the blue line.
Place notation.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
And marvellous, really.
I've got some of Jack Brown's copies.
The other ringers at say Andrew Corrigan, Fred Hancock, and Fred Hancock brought in all his family.
Yes.
3 or 4 of them, sons and the daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there was Jack Hillier.
But that was post.
Jack Hillier joined in at Redcliffe, and Frank Hansford.
Yes.
And we got together a fairly, well, not a bad band. We could ring Grant for Sings. And we occasionally rang Royal and Little Bob Royal. Occasionally, Bob Maximum.
Yes.
But then, of course, they made the 12. They bought an edition of Flat 6,
Yeah.
and that opened up that middle 8. Because before then, if you had younger ringers, you couldn't. It was difficult to ring on his back 8 or 10.
But you know, you're now talking about the 1950s after Redcliffe Guild was formed, aren't you?
Yeah.
What's the piece of paper you've got there?
Well, I was pulling this out when Sid was talking about Don Cliff, because there's a letter that Don Cliff wrote me in 1964. It's about the paid ringing at Redcliffe. And there is the actual paid ringing written out in Alfie Pearce's handwriting, and that was passed over to Don Cliff by Alfie Pearce when he took the tar over from Henry Pring. And we were talking about this after a peal in Warwickshire at Peter Border's house back in 1964, and Don, when he went back to Cardiff, sent me a copy of each of those,
Yes.
which only recently
That gives us the days on which there was special ringing.
paid ringing, yes.
And the letter says what? Perhaps it'd be interesting to read it, because I don't think we'll pick it up on camera.
The letter says, in my search for this paper, I came across a reference to Clark Sons and Press. Their address was 23 Broad Street, Bristol, and I have a note to the effect that all accounts for ringing at Redcliffe was to be sent to them, as apparently they were the solicitors to the diocesan registrar. Well, I've since discovered that their successors, whose name is now Osborne Clark, they are still the solicitors to the diocesan registrar, and as recently as earlier this month, I sent Keith Scudamore a copy of this, together with a copy of Frank Hansford's letter fixing the first lot of Sunday morning ringing at Redcliffe. That was 35 years ago. He had some real difficulty with Fox Cartwright in getting that Sunday morning fixed. Fox Cartwright wasn't keen on it at all, and Frank had to go and argue his case. But there's the original letter to about 14 people in October 1958, including Pat Bird and Albert Tyler, and asking us to go down there. Would we support ringing one Sunday morning a month?
Yes.
And if I can interject here, I don't know if that's appropriate for this particular thing. I didn't really want to steal any of their thunder, but when you mention Andrew Corrigan, I also told Keith Screwmore the story that Jack Hiller told me in his own words, and I'm going to use the very swear words that Jack used. When Andrew Corrigan died, it was his wish that his ashes be scattered in Redcliffe Churchyard.
That's right.
And Jack Hiller, being the undertaker on the case, approached Fox Cartwright and said, could he do this, please? Absolutely no, said Fox Cartwright, who was a somewhat prickly character. This would be creating a precedent. Yeah. So Jack said, look at the bloody vicar. He said, I got what was left of old Andrew in one of them great big matchboxes, and one dark Thursday night into Redcliffe practice, going in, I scattered old Andrew in the chest. Look at the bloody vicar. I put all this swear words and all in a letter that I sent to Keith Screwmore last week, because there's an even follow on from that. If you read the Express and Echo, the local Exeter paper, Fox Cartwright has just retired from being vicar, so from being Bishop of Plymouth.
Really?
And he's retired to the Devonshire village of Ede, and he's bought a house, a little cottage right alongside the parish church tower at Ede, and he's already been complaining to the local ringers about ringing, and the right rumpus going between him, and it's on the front line. It's a front page. Yeah. It's a front page heading as per this. Bishop in unholy ding dong with ringers, and that's old Fox Cartwright. So I've sent Keith Scudamore all of this.
Yeah. What about another ringer whose name has cropped up several times, and his name is on field orders, is Stephen H. Wood. And Albert, you mentioned him earlier on the tape we were listening to. What can you tell us about Stephen H. Wood?
Well, not a great deal really. I know that he worked for the Imperial Tobacco Company. He was the son of
Vicar of Almondbury.
Reverend,
that's right.
Yeah.
Vicar of Almondbury. But he came to live in Clifton, and I got to know him in connection with ringing at St Mary's Redcliffe practice nights, and also St Stephen's practice nights. I found him very good, very helpful. He could certainly be spoken to, and he was prepared to talk and listen to. Now, he was a very capable conductor. He was also a very capable composer. My recollection is of his knowledge of Stedman caters particularly, because he produced a twin bob composition of Stedman caters, which I don't think has been surpassed since. And it's only occasionally run, mainly I suppose, because people tend to lose track of the figures of the field. But that really is about as much as I can tell you.
He died in the Blitz, I think, didn't he?
Oh yes. Now you see, well.
Fill up that 10 minutes.
Yes.
That's the only time I've ever been up there.
Yes.
I rather wanted to talk about some of the bells of Bristol that were lost in the Blitz, which those of our generation, Dick and myself, could never have rung on, but you must have done. What about St Nicholas? What were they like as a field of bells?
Well, St Nicholas, I regarded St Nicholas as being a very good 10, and I liked the bells because of the weight, the music in them, because they were beautiful sounding Peter bells. There was I think it was the 6 that seemed to shout down a little bit. That was my impression. They were fairly quiet in the tower, but I just recall the sticks being a bit of a nuisance to my ears, as it were. Outside, while they were loud, they were a little bit strong, almost fearful, as I would recall at the time. I mean, fearful would be the wrong word to use now, but it would have been my impression of saying, well, they were a little bit fearful.
What do you remember?
Well, I remember St Nicholas very well. I love those bells. We went down there every third Thursday with the St Phyllis band, and that was where I first rang my grandson caters and stuff.
We'll have to stop a minute because the tape's actually stopped.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were talking to us about St
Yes,
Nicholas.
because I remember one particular incident about St Nicholas. Edgar Guys proposed me as a member of the Ancient Society, College Youth, and Joe Hawkins seconded me. But Joe Hawkins used to come down to the dinner every year, and he loved Bristol. He really loved Bristol. He thought it was a Mecca ring, as it was, really, with all those rings of bells in that small area. And he came to me one day after dinner, and I said, "Have you enjoyed yourself?" Joe, he said, "I've had a wonderful day." He said, "When I come down to Bristol, I always make a point of going down to the Welsh Back and hearing St Nicholas bell." He said they were one of the finest rings he'd ever heard. And that quite impressed me.
Yeah, yes. Well, the rumour is for those who didn't, of us who didn't ring there, that they were a fine peal of 10.
Yeah.
But alas, we shall never be able to hear them, because I don't think I've ever heard a recording of them. Dick, you've got a picture there.
That's the St Nicholas Ringers, 1910, and that's their outing to Glastonbury. According to a note on the back by F.G. May. Whether Sid can some later date fill in some of the names of those faces will be interesting to see.
Well, we'll have a look later on and see.
Yes.
And what about the other bells that were lost, very briefly? I mean, St Peter's and St Mary Le Port, what were they like?
Could I mention about St Mary Le Port, because Edgar Guys asked me to ring in a peal there, which was to welcome the new vicar, the Reverend Dodgson Sykes, and he conducted a peal of Bob Major on January the 10th, 1934. And I rang the 5th, Ern Abraham on the treble, Edgar Guys the 2nd, Harry Burt the 3rd. That was the St Matthew's ringer. Fred Leaker the 4th, myself on the 5th, Gilbert Pearce on the 6th, Jack Carman on the 7th, and Francis Gilmore on the tenor. That was my first peal of Major. And unfortunately, I've made some notes about these things, but I expect you all remember Harry Burt. He's the most terrible striker you ever come across. And I said I enjoyed the pill except for the bad beating and striking of the ringer of the 3rd. Proud to say I rang the whole pill without making a mistake. Previous attempt cancelled owing to the 7th being unringable because the rope was slipping.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
So they weren't an easy peal of bells to ring. What are your memories of them, Albert? Did you ring there?
Oh yes, I did. Only about 3 occasions. And I can't remember the particular occasions that it was. But certainly it was something special that was put on, and we had to go and ring there. I remember ringing the treble, and I think it was a peal of about 12-13 hundredweight. Something like that, was it? Have you got it there?
Should be
15 and 3/4.
Pardon?
15.
15.
15?
Yeah.
Was it? Oh, heavier than I thought then.
Not a bad sounding ring. I quite enjoyed them.
Yeah.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes. I quite enjoyed the ring, and quite enjoyed the sound.
Yeah.
But I don't recall really what they were like, the rest of the bells were like. I rang the treble each time I went there.
Yeah.
Which has turned out to be not unusual for me. Ringing.
What about the other bells at St Peter's just down the road.
or St Peter's, that was, they were more regular in their ringing. I used to go along to St Peter's on occasions when St Stephen's had finished ringing and they were ringing at St Peter's. And I fancy the Bennets were largely in control there at the time. There were several other learners. I don't remember who they were. And that tended to be a rather large ringing room, as my recollection. The bells went quite well. I can't remember hearing them outside of the tower, oddly enough. Perhaps I didn't ever hear them outside. But certainly inside they were quite acceptable, quite pleasant, and you could hear them all reasonably well when you were ringing.
Did you ever ring a field day?
No, I didn't.
What about you, Sid? What's your memories?
Well, I've got a lot of memories. Do you want me to?
Yes.
Right. Says, I remember this tower with its ring of 8 bells very well. It was the years 1936 to 38 that I rang these occasionally. I always associated St Peter's Tower with the well-known local character Fred Porch, who was steeplekeeper. I met him first at St Philip's and St James Tower, St James, where he used to come, St Philip's Tower on Thursday evenings, where he used to come on Thursdays. I was a regular visitor to St Philip's, where the disciplined captaincy of Jack Brown helped my progress to more advanced ringing. Fred Porch, I'm going to speak about him, was always arrived late, and after having a touch of stem in a groundsel, would leave early in order to get across to St Nicholas before 9 p.m, where he was to ring the curfew as deputy to Jimmy Richmond. Jimmy Richmond was a well-known and respected character, by the way, at St Nicholas. Fred Porch always wore a bowler hat and a frock-tailed coat, much the better for wear. It was almost green at the back. He always rang with his fingers through the loop at the end of the back rope. Always did. At St Peter's, where they practice on Monday nights, I also first met Bert Bennett. You mentioned Bert Bennett and his wife.
Was that the same Bennett as Albert was referring to in charge at St Peter's? Is that the same Bennett family?
Yes, the same family.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Bert sang alto in the choir there. He will be remembered for the sterling work he did at St John's on the Wall, 6 Mills, teaching ringers at the Bristol School of Ringing, which was being run with the help of Jack Brown and several other Bristol ringers. Bert later joined the St James Band, 10 bells, and he also joined the choir there. St Peter's had a square, spacious ringing chamber, and there was a good circle of ropes, and the bells were in a fairly good order with a tenor of 1800 weight. The bells sounded well outside and over the water at counterslip. One thing I always remember about the ringing chamber, however, was a galvanized metal chute, which came up from the heating system in the church below, through the corner of the chamber, and the belfry was and out of the belfry and out onto the roof. When the bells were ringing, the sound was heavily distorted at times by the reverberations against the galvanized metal.
Yeah.
St Peter's Church at that time, 38-39, was well known for its rector, the Reverend Loveday, who initiated the first lunch hour services for city workers, which were well supported. The church was destroyed in an air raid on the 24th of November 1940. The strong tower survived the Blitz, as did the walls of the church, but 6 of the bells were smashed to pieces, and the other 2 bells were left hanging precariously. John Taylor and Company recovered them and the metal from the old ring in 1963. There's some other information if you want that.
Yeah. Albert, you had some notes there, and I know that you've got to think about going. Are there any other points, you know, that you have got down there that you feel worthwhile making at this stage?
Well, okay, let me see. What I've dealt with. Yes, I was going to mention that when Fred Tyler was referred to, I was going to mention that he was a member of St Philip's for long before I came to Bristol.
Is he your uncle?
Yes, yes.
Right.
Now, Fred was a member of St Philip's, and I think you'll find his name appears on one or two of the pier boards.
Oh, yes.
In St Philip's.
It does, yes.
It does, yes, yes, that's right. And that was one other item.
Was he a bell hanger, or was he?
Not to my knowledge.
No.
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 Just your father and grandfather, didn't
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yes. Mention was made of St George as being a 6, a peal of 6, and then later into 8.
1919. They were augmented.
1919. I didn't know that it was originally a peal of 6.
1879.
So, yeah,
6.
yes.
Yeah.
So I was interested to hear that particular point.
Mm.
Now, there was reference to drinks in the tower, and I can remember that at Redcliffe we had drinks in the tower on one occasion. I can't remember when that was, and I have a feeling that it could have been for the old year, but I'm not too sure about that, because that seems quite inconsistent for anything connected with St Mary Redcliffe to allow drinks up in the tower, but there was one occasion when I had drinks in the tower, and that also put me on to the point that we did have drinks in the tower at St Stephen's. And I do remember one New Year's Eve, after we had spent rather a long time at the local pub, which was the Naval Volunteer, and we climbed up the tower with Fred Leaker, and I remember he pulled off his bell, and I don't think he ever saw the Sally again.
That was in the early 50s, wasn't it?
Oh, this was later, a little later on.
Yeah, I think Enid Lloyd Robertson and Red Ship and myself were around that night. We'd been in the volunteer.
Oh, were you?
Oh. Yeah, because we're only ringing 7 triples on the back 8, and I remember Fred missing his road.
Yes, I know that.
We all wanted to dodge. We all wanted to dodge 4 times instead of 3.
Oh, I see. Yes, yes. Well, can you remember? Was that the night when we had drinks in the tower?
I don't think so. I can remember that we'd been. That was when we used to go to the volunteer and drink draft Guinness with the odd glass of draft port in between.
That's right.
And Fred Leaker was, hey, Harry, my knees is gone, never mind, sort of thing.
Yes, yes. Well, there was definitely one night when we did actually have drinks in the tower between changing the bells over from with clappers to without clappers. But anyway, that was one point I was going to make. The other thing was referring to Jack Brown and his comments about their ringing and meeting afterwards. Now, I remember in my earliest days of Sunday morning ringing that we used to walk up the road to meet at the corner of what is now called Christchurch, and there were ringers that seemed to come from all directions from 11 o'clock onwards. And I remember on one occasion there was a stranger that came up to a group of the ringers there, talking, and he said, "Can you tell me where I can get a drink this morning?" And he was clearly after as much booze as he could get, because he appeared to be certainly under the weather then. And he was suddenly told, "Oh, just down the road, you can't miss it, it's the Angel." And you'll find it's okay, you'll get as much drink as you like down there. And I didn't know the Angel, and I couldn't think where the devil the Angel was, because I knew they used to go down to the St Nicholas Street and turn right and go along and went into the Rummer.
Yeah, Rummer.
You see? And because I used to walk along with them to there, and then I used to have to disappear because I just was old enough to go in then. But it wasn't until a long time afterwards that I went down the road one morning and I saw the Angel. And I thought, well, I wonder what that chap thought. And there in the back, the east end of the church of St Nicholas, was the Angel cast in the wall and giving water.
It's the end of the St Nicholas culvert, isn't it?
That's right, yes.
The ancient water drawing place.
Yeah, that's right, yes, yes. Yeah.
He wasn't after water, though, was he?
Oh, no, he didn't say that. He said a drink.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that was a reminder I had, and I think that's really, yes, I think that's really the main points from the conversations that we've had. There are a number of other things that have occurred to me during the day arising from this, but this tends to come on a little bit into the 1940s to 50s, you know. And so I haven't left that, I haven't included that.
Right.
And in fact, I don't think it probably is appropriate at the time.
Well, we'll probably come on to that later. So I think now, as it's now 3 o'clock and you wanted to go at 2:30, we'll actually cut it there and let you get away, and then we can pick up Sid afterwards.
Right.
Thanks a lot anyway.
Very good. Okay, right, thank you.
For all these years, since the 1920s.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about St Werburgh's and what's happened there?
Well, there aren't many churches in the country that have been dedicated after St Werburgh, only 5 altogether. And St Werburgh's in Bristol appears to have been, there was an Irish influence some years ago, and several Dublin churches are dedicated to St Werburgh's, and one of the priests who came over is reported to have brought the dedication wish over to Bristol when they built that church. It's a Saxon church originally. And so in 1125, there's the first record in the Lincoln records of St Werburgh's, and its gift to the crown. And it served the community well. With there were 2 Lord Mayors buried in the church, and their memorials that have now been moved into the new church. The old church was taken down by the City Council, tried to take it down without getting proper Act of Parliament permission, and there was 70 years delay before they were able to get permission to take the church down in Corn Street, because it was there, but it was obstructing the roadway, and there were already so many churches then. I think they were down to about 10 parishioners. So it was decided in the end, after all the acts had been passed, to take the church down and move it out to Baptist Mills, which is a growing parish beyond the old boundaries of Newfoundland Road to the end of the Froome there, where the Baptist Mills is. And it was rebuilt. A lot of the stone was used from the city, but I think the decayed stone obviously had to be replaced. And the architect Mr. J. Bevan, a Bristol architect, successfully copied the city tower. Now, if anybody who saw that, then compared it with the picture in the city, they would not fail to recognise it as the same tower, beautifully done. The only difference is that, if you examine it closely, is that they've moved the tower access, the spiral stairway from the south corner to another corner of the tower, so that they can leave the south door with free access into the porch. Then the bells, which have been instant workers, originally a ring of 4, and the earliest bell is the tenor, which weighs 13 stone, 13 hundredweight. Was cast in the London foundry in 1450. And the third is the next oldest bell, which is cast in Fisher-Curtley by Bristol family named Jeffreys. TG is the initials on the bells. The old treble and the old fifth. The fifth was recast at the time of making the ring up to 1696, and Abraham Ruddle came down and cast 2 new bells, the present treble and the second. They dated 1696, and he recast the old third and made it into the fifth, and rehung the bells then. And the bells, of course, were in Corn Street. And when the church was moved out to Baptist Mills, Henry York, who was a joiner and carpenter in Bristol, he was employed by Rudhall's to move the bells out to Baptist Mills, and they were rehung there in an oak frame, and they've been rung ever since. And the frame is still in good condition, and the bells go very well. If you think of the fact that they've been in there since 1878, it's now 1993, which is 115 years, isn't it?
And the bells are still in good condition?
Yes, in good condition. The only thing is the clapperings. The clapperings got loose. I think they all need rebushing and probably new pulley boxes and pulleys. But otherwise the bells go well. The only bell that's given any trouble now is the fourth, and that really wants constant greasing. The tenor's going a bit more heavily than it used to do. But otherwise, we ring every week.
Even though at this point in time that the church is, as you say, being declared redundant again, and it is, however, got a use at the moment.
Yes, yes, the church was declared redundant in 1988.
Yeah.
And for 2 years it lay derelict, and of course because of that, when you have a derelict building, you get all the vandals coming along. They smashed the windows. In the end, they had to board up all the windows. And of course, to go inside after worshipping in that church all my life, and all the other Christians, they felt terrible about it. So in a way, they've come around to accepting it's far better to have somebody using that building than leaving it derelict, because the thing would go into absolute disrepair. And of course, we've been able to arrange with the diocesan board, with the help of Father Colden, I must say, to continue the ringing upstairs in the belfry. And a 5-year lease has been granted to a company called the Undercover Rock Company of Bristol. Mr. Parker is the man, and his wife was put up all the money. In fact, they had to sell all their own property to finance the deal. But they've taken on a 5-year full repairing lease. And they've turned the inside into a marvellous climbing centre. And the height of the nave is 45 feet, which is very good for climbers who can only climb 3 or 4 months of the year in the summer, and in the winter they've got nowhere to go to. That's why he saw a similar thing done in Sheffield, a building turned into a climbing centre of a church, and he was taken. He admired it so much that he and his wife decided to go in, and they looked around Bristol to find a building suitable, and they found St. Burber's in the end. And I must say he's a very nice fellow, cooperative with the ringers. He finds no annoyance in the ringing at all and supports it.
Good.
Well, that's good that there's still a ringing presence there, you know, after all that time. You've still got a band that's going on ringing there.
Yes, you've still got a band, we're keeping the bells going. It's far better for the bells to be rung and maintained than to lie derelict, isn't it?
Yes, yes it is.
That's right. This is the earliest known photograph of St. Werburgh's Church.
Hold it there a moment, Sid.
Yes.
And, I will try and get in on it if I can. Take me the time. Well, when
That
you
was
say
taken
the
in
earliest
1905.
and that's
That's when it was
present
built
site, of course.
at Baptist Mill.
Baptist Mills.
You see, that field and wall opposite is no longer there. There are houses and shops there.
Yes.
But you can see the end house of St. Werburgh's
Yes.
Park.
Yes.
They
Yeah.
started building St. Werburgh's Park.
Yeah.
And beyond there, there's the railway on the left-hand
Right.
side.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
No.
That's an interesting photograph.
yes, and the band before the redundancy.
Yeah, if you hold it steady. I can
That's
get
the
in
band
on that.
before the redundancy. Do you want me to read the names out? Or not?
The band before the redundancy. That was.
Yeah, just before the redundancy was announced.
Yes. Who have you got there?
Well, Vic Jones on the going from the left to right.
Yeah.
Vic Jones,
Yeah.
Alan Williams, S. Riches, Linda de Havilland,
Yeah.
Martin
Haynes.
Martin Haynes, that's right. Reverend Masters, Dudley Thompson, who was captain at the time. I was secretary then.
Yeah.
Len Bailey, Clive
Haynes.
Richard Thompson, that's his son, and Miss T. Masters, who learned to ring quite successfully.
Yeah. Right. And
That's a photograph of as it was in the town.
well, I've never
About
seen a picture like that.
1876.
And that's stretching out. You can see up Corden Street, of course. You can
That's
see
right.
All Saints on the right-hand side,
That's right.
and you can see how it actually juts out into the
That's
road.
right. Yeah.
I've never seen that picture before.
It's a beautiful thing.
It's a very interesting picture. And when you look at it, it's a very sort of St. Stephen's-like tower, isn't it?
Very much, yes.
Very much.
In fact,
Thanks.
at one
Yeah.
time on the top of St. Werburgh's there was a turret. And another, if you see the very old Prince
yeah.
of Bristol,
Yeah, yeah.
but they took that down later.
Very interesting, that.
Yeah. Well, that's a lovely photograph. In fact,
Yeah.
you're welcome to have that. I've got another one at home.
Oh, yes, yes.
That was used in
yes,
the Christmas card.
that's a very interesting picture to put with some of the others I've got, the
Yeah.
old Bristol towers. Good. Anything else now that we've got to talk about? It's just
Well, before Albert left, I've only rung 30 bells.
30 peals. Yeah.
And going through it the other day, I came across the fact that was the first peal of Grand Succinct, St. Mary Redcliffe, that I rang in. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. Number 17.
That's right.
Shall I just speak about it?
Yes.
It was rung on Saturday, February the 17th, 1951. And Fred Baker rang the treble, Alf Breeze the second, myself the third, Albert Tyler the fourth, Jack R. Worrell, who's
Yes.
now in Jersey,
Yes.
5, Jean McDowell rang the sixth, Ivor Truman
Yes. No, I
rang the
used to up
seventh,
down in Hampshire.
Tom Kimber, he coming up from, I think it's just down below Peasdown.
Did you know him?
Yes, he used to
He's
go to a
down.
lot of St. Philip's practices with Jack
That's
Bowden,
right,
didn't
Tom
he?
Kimber rang the eighth. Alan Hiller, or Jack Hiller,
Jack
he was
Hiller.
known, he rang the ninth. Emlyn F. Hancock the 10th, and Norman Coon was the 11th. Leonard Derrick, famous
And
Leonard Derrick rang the
yeah.
10th.
Yeah. Right.
And it was first peal on 12 bells for G. McDowell, Ivor Truman and Alan Hillier. The first pair of grounds are six by all the band. First pair of in the method as conductor.
And the who conducted it?
Eminem of Hancock. First pair of grounds are sings on the bells.
And Alfie Reeves was in that.
Yes.
That was his first peal of grounds of six.
Yes.
That's incredible.
I showed it to Albert Turner very fast. See?
Yes.
I couldn't believe it when I turned it over the other day.
I remember when that one was run. I was in Bristol.
You were?
Yeah.
So that was quite a peal, really, wasn't it? I think
In fact, I was doing a little bit of ringing at Redcliffe at that time.
Yeah.
Right.
I suppose another thing I ought to say about, we all remember special pills that we've enjoyed, don't we? And one I particularly remember is when we took a band down to Columpton.
Yeah.
And we rang a glorious pill, Stem Caters. We should never forget it. And I'll tell you who rang with us was a Devonshire ringer, Arthur H. Reed.
Oh, Arthur Reed was from Taunton.
Taunton.
Staple Grove,
That's
Taunton.
right, that's the
Yeah.
man. But he said afterwards, he said it was one of the best ringers he's ever enjoyed. William Kingscote was with us from Ringfield.
Bill Kingscote.
And Herbert Knight.
Yes, yes. When was that, Sid?
That was in 1948.
Yeah,
October the
well,
2nd.
I expect Dick and I both rang several peals with Arthur H. Reed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And William H. Kingscote.
Bill Kingscote, yes, both the last now no longer with us.
It's conducted by Don Clift. And it was a really wonderful pill. I don't think a mistake was made right throughout.
No.
You don't get many pills like that, do you?
No, that's right. Oh,
I think you were in the first peal of Stem and Triples I ever rang at Almondsbury.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes, that's
Called by Roger Fry, I believe.
yes, that's right.
Because strangely enough, Albert, for all his stem and ringing, Albert didn't ring a peal of Stem and Triples till somewhere about 1955. In his lifetime, he'd lost about 40.
he lost a lot of peals.
He'd lost an awful lot of Stem and Triples before he eventually succeeded in ringing one. And I was absolutely astounded that, well, you know, how is it I get Stem and Triples at the first attempt if poor old Albert said 40 goes, you know? Must be difficult to call.
Yes.
There was one other thing, and this is going back a bit further now. Jack Brown mentioned, and it knows before your time because he died a long time since, but this was Jimmy Hinton, wasn't it? Dick was mentioning earlier on, and you said you had something that you wanted to say. Did you ever hear anything about James Hinton, who died in...
I heard a lot about him. I never met him.
What did you hear about him?
Oh, I heard that he was a marvellous conductor. And James's man.
Yeah, go and sit over next to Sid and put this on.
Yes, I'll tell you to tell me. Old Dick Chalmers used to tell me, and Harry Way.
Yeah.
And Frank Joel. They
Yes.
always St James Ringers used to keep on about him. And Fred May. They sort of linked them together.
They did. Yes.
Yes.
Well, there's a photograph of him in the Belfry, St
Yes.
Stephen's, isn't there?
Yes.
And as we've already established, he died as early as 1910. But the late E.J. Taylor, who was secretary of the Devon Guild of Ringers, and he used to ring in the Reading area with Bill Hibbert and people like that, he used to say he was one of the road ringers at Bristol because he was very well off, but it was rumoured very strongly that he was receiver of stolen goods.
Well, he was certainly a wealthy man by all.
But you see, I only heard that from a source outside Bristol. I never actually got it from any old Bristol ringer. The best they'd say, oh, he's a bit of a lad, or he was well off, or he was a good ringer.
Yes.
you never got it. So,
Well, there's an old story going around about certain malpractices in Bristol, weren't there, after the Blitz?
Was that so?
Metal.
Metal was missing.
I wouldn't name names, but it was known, particularly St Peter.
Yes. That the metal disappeared.
Anything must have disappeared, and all sorts of suspicions aroused. It would be far better if it had been cleared, really, because suspicions fell on innocent people.
Yes, yes.
Well, I wasn't here at the time, but I heard all about it afterwards.
Yes.
You know, the other ringers.
Oh well, these things are lost in the mist of time, and best so, I suppose.
Yeah, but it is remarkable when you get a small group together like this, how these older memories come up so well, don't they?
Yes, they do, that's right.
And they're talked about, and it brings, it triggers off some memory of years ago.
Mm.
But you certainly got cases of certain London towers, two that immediately come to mind, where you could read quite authoritative sounding articles that said the bells were lost in the Blitz and so on. And in fact, there was the case of St Bride's, Fleet Street. The bells came down from the tower and so on, but they were under the debris in the tower. That the metal of them wasn't completely lost. Also, the bow bells. Though that tower, though that church was heavily blitzed and so on, and the bells got severely damaged, they didn't vanish as molten metal in the Blitz. They were there as bell metal to be collected, broken up, and reused. I got one photograph from David Corby showing that the tenor bow lying in the bottom of the tower broken.
Well, it would be easy to lose bells like that, I suppose,
Oh, yes.
and to lose track of them when they're taken out, because the temple churches, with Jack Brown reported, were taken out before the war. For what reason, Sid? Do you know why they were taken out?
Well, yeah, actually, I've seen a copy of the letter
Yes.
to bell counters, or asking them to give a quotation for taking them out.
What was the purpose of taking them out before the war?
Well, the bombing had already taken place
I
in
see.
parts of England,
Yes.
and it was feared it would come to Bristol.
Mm.
And George Tryon was the man. He was the trustee
Yeah.
of the temple trustees, and they took the wise decision to take those bells out.
Yes.
And they put them into the crypt under the hall nearby, didn't they?
They were stored underground,
yeah.
and they were really kept locked up until the Wills family really paid to have them taken out, and the temple trustees agreed to transfer them to the cathedral. And in fact, had Dave Padfield's augmentation succeeded at the cathedral next to two and so on, that would really have to have been done with the permission probably of the temple trustees. They still have some sort of hold over those
Yeah,
bells.
they have.
But I also seem to think that Redcliffe bells were taken out and stored during the war. Would I be right in saying that? Or did they stay in the tower all the
Never heard
time?
of that. Yeah.
But it would be easy to lose track of a Peter bells like
Yeah.
that if they were taken out and gradually
Yeah.
people sort of forgot about them.
I think the Dawson authorities have got a lot to blame themselves for that so much metal was lost, because there was seemed to be no system of removing that metal as quickly as possible from debris, under debris.
Yes, yes.
And there was a case of St Nicholas.
Mm.
When Reverend Cawley went up there, he found that the remaining bells were remaining there, most of them.
What,
Years after
yes,
that.
yes.
There were
Years
nine
after the war.
in the base of the tower for years.
Mm.
Yes.
Yes,
For years.
yes.
I mean, the Dawson officials are in charge of the gifts of the church. They should have seen to that.
Mm.
They had valuable metal there.
In
just
fact,
fine.
it wasn't until that church building was restored as an ecclesiastical museum that the old bells were taken away as part exchange for the metal for the new bells which are at the tower at the moment.
Mm.
I think it was the same as St Peter's. They found some of the bells that were hanging precariously. That was the wording
Yes.
used.
Yes.
Years after.
Mm. That's right. But it would be easy to lose track of bells like that. I mean,
yeah.
you've got the situation now in Australia, of course, where in Perth they've got the set from St Martin's in the Fields.
Yeah.
And those bells are still there hanging about in some backyard somewhere, at risk of being lost because people lose track. In Philadelphia, in the States, we know that there is a peal of 12 bells lying on the floor of some hall there, and have been for years. And it's only through the ferreting efforts of some of the American ringers that lived there that 12 has been almost sort of rediscovered.
Yeah.
It's almost lost to memory as to why the bells were brought there, and you could easily have lost the temple bells like that, it seems to me.
Yeah.
Or St Martin of Birmingham owned
Yeah.
12. I mean,
Yeah.
they are split in two parts around John Taylor's foundry at Loughborough at the moment, but at least, you know, they are under lock and key.
Yes.
Let's face it, these diocesan boards have got no really qualified man. In Bristol, we're lucky to have Father Coley, because he's quite an expert.
He is,
And
yes.
a marvellous historian.
Yes.
And he's quick to seize on these sort of things. If he'd been around at that time, we wouldn't have had all this metal about and lost and possibly stolen.
Yes. Well, let's hope that for the bells we've got at the moment, there's a better future. So
Yeah.
let's cut a moment, and we'll see if there's anything else we've got to say before we actually finish. So, any it was the question of the Bristol branch, as it was. I think it was the Bristol Archdeaconry, and at some time it split into what was then known as the Bristol City and the Bristol Rural Branch. Can you tell me when it was and why it happened?
Yes, it was probably was 1936 or 7, and I remember it well because I was at a branch meeting at Bitton. I remember this well, and after we'd had tea and we went round to the usual business meeting, a fellow got up and said, "Why was it the branch had not had a meeting at Bitton for 4 years?" or 5 years. And then the chairman at the time, I think, was John Jeffries. And he said, "Well, look at the number of towers in the Bristol branch. And if you look at the number of towers, you see, if you went to each tower once a month, you wouldn't cover them in 4 or 5 years."
No.
So Edgar Guy's heard of this complaint afterwards, and he decided to split the old branch into two and make this Bristol City branch, which would cover all the city branches, and the Bristol Rural branch would cover all the out-of-town branches. Now, he made an awful mistake when he cut out some of the traditional city towers, such as Henbury. Henbury was put into the rural branch, and Warburg was put into the rural branch. Stapledon was put into the rural branch, and St Ambrose.
Yeah.
And the feeling got around it, instead of being an exercise to carry out the wishes of expressed by the Bitton ringers, that they'd come more often, that there's a bit of ill feeling.
Yeah. Was St Werburgh's in the rural or the city at that
But in
time?
the rural
In
branch.
the rural branch, yes.
Yeah, and that was ridiculous, really. And so unfortunately, that started the ill feeling that persisted for years, and still is. You still go to these branches, and these chaps in the rural branches, they won't come into Bristol for some reason.
Well, it does. It's interesting you should say that,
Yeah.
because of course I think it was when John Hunt was secretary of the city branch, he engineered the transfer of a number of towers like St Werburgh's and Stapleton and St Ambrose particularly, which he was interested in, St George, and Henbury into the Bristol City branch, which made much more sense because many of those towers were within the confines of the city of Bristol anyway, as it stood. And he only said to me fairly recently, when talking about the Jeffries family, that so-and-so never forgave me, he said, for bringing those towers into the Bristol City branch. And then, of course, later on, through the influence of Edward Mould and one or two others, the rural branch became known as the North Avon branch. But that couldn't have been, I think, until after 1973, when local government reorganisation took place, and North Avon became an entity.
It's a great pity that division occurred. I think it caused an unnecessary break between the city and the
But actually,
rural.
in the earlier days of the association, again, I quote my sources as being the Bell News, 1901 and so on, the Bristol branch, I think you will find Bristol branch meetings used to be held as far afield as Berkeley and Chippenham and so on. Bristol branch used to go all that way up in the very early days, and its its confines have been somewhat narrowed down over the years, except when John Hunt added a little bit of logic to it.
Well, that's right, yes. God, it was much more logical then.
I suppose, I think if they went back to making it one branch, it would not be a good idea.
It wouldn't, no, it
No,
wasn't.
because there'd be too many towers in it.
Yes, yes.
And somebody suggested recently to made it one branch, we don't know where it was.
I don't think that
far
either
better
branch would
to
want
let the North Acre branch thrive, and it is thriving. In
Yes,
fact,
it is.
three new rings of bells.
Yes, yes, that's right. I'm sure it's right. It's the right division as it stands at
Yeah.
the moment. Good. Right, we'll hang on there again. Then, is there anything else that we need to? So it's run up now to 4 o'clock. So
Make a speech with a piece of paper. When I was nominated and elected as a member of the college youths, that was the 299th dinner.
Yes.
The 300th dinner, and the guy gave me a piece of paper. He said, "You're going to propose the toast to the visitors." At the college youth dinner, I was a little bit overcome with it, and I did it. And it was quite an ordeal. I hadn't been up to London much in that way. And of course, the speeches up there are quite long, and when it got towards the end, obviously everybody was tired of the speeches, so I speeded it up a little. But that was you had no preparations. It was only the fact that I was able to go through the menu card and find the visitors that were coming. I was able, in the end, to get together sort of a collection of all those visitors that ought to be noted in the speech. So similar experience to...
yeah, similar to Albert's in many ways.
And that's the speech, my wife typed it out for me, that I made at the annual dinner when I was chairman of the United Ringing Guild in 1935.
At the college youths dinner?
No, that was in Bristol.
Oh, that was in
the
Bristol,
Origin.
was it? Yeah, yeah, fantastic. You've got it. That's a good
They're
historical
typed out
record.
if you want to read
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Fine. Well, Sid, thanks ever so much for coming. I think that's been a very valuable record. I'm sure that Dick and I, when we look back on this, and Nick as well, we might think of many more questions. So if we come back to you again sometime,
Yeah,
we'll know why it is.
well, I
There'll
hope
be
I've
other
been-
things that
hope
we
I've been
might
helpful.
need to know.
That's that collection of surprise records by
Andrew Corrigan.
Andrew Corrigan gave to me, love.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I've got one
You've
of
got
those.
one?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I've got Jack Brown's
I'd
copy.
like to have a look at that, Sid, before you put it
Well,
away.
you get it.
But thanks very much for all you've done, and you know, I think that will be a very valuable record for the
Oh,
future.
yeah.
Was your tape running when I told you about Andrew Corrigan and Jack Hillier?
Yes, yes, it was. It came round. Yeah, it was. It captured.